Jeff Carlisle, who, of course, teamed with Kyle Bonagura over at ESPN.com to write all about it. So, Jeff, we've been talking about it here between Herc and I. Like, is there a way forward for Gregg Berhalter with the U.S. men's national team? What do you think? Where does this scandal leave Gregg Berhalter and his candidacy moving forward to get another 4 years with the U.S.?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I mean, I don't think there's a way that Gregg Berhalter can continue as manager of the U.S. men's national team. I think, that there were some reasons that were piling up before, certainly the admission that he made before the leadership conference. I think, that certainly would have raised some eyebrows in the locker room. But and even though it was 31 years ago, I think that's just not something that U.S. soccer can easily move on from, especially in the climate that they've been experiencing on the women's side of the game over the last 18 to 24 months. Obviously there have been accusations that abuse from coaches was swept under the rug or not acted upon, and U.S. soccer has taken a lot of deserved criticism over that. And so now you have a situation where Gregg Berhalter has admitted to an instance of domestic abuse. And I think it's just easier for the U.S. Soccer Federation to move on to other candidates, to look at other possible coaches to fill this position, especially with the U.S. co-hosting the 2026 World Cup with Canada and Mexico. So I disagree with I think what Herc said, that Gregg will never work again. I suspect that he will. What capacity that ends up being, I think still remains to be seen. But certainly, I think within U.S. soccer circles, there's a heightened sensitivity to this for good reason. And, for that reason, I suspect that they will move on from Gregg Berhalter and look at someone else.
I think I said we'll make it more difficult, or may, but if that's not what came across, my apologies.
Yeah, okay. No. Either way, let's move on. Next up here, I want to know about the timetable, Jeff. How does this affect the timetable for the next managerial hire? Because right now we got Anthony Hudson in charge. We got some games coming up at the end of January. We got Nations League coming in March. Like, the schedule's going to ramp up pretty quickly here. What do you think as far as timetable for an announcement of who the next coach will be if it's not Berhalter?
Well, I think you're right. They've got to move on pretty quickly. And they've got to, first of all, they've got to have this investigation be completed. But I think the USSF leadership is in an awkward situation because they can't be seen trying to speed this process up. They really have to take a hands-off approach and let the law firm do its due diligence and do its investigating and then see what kind of conclusions they come up with. I've got to believe that by the end of February, this situation has to be resolved in terms of who the next coach is going to be. Now, there is some time, that's almost 2 months. But, I think it's once the results of the investigation come out, then I think it's, the coaching search is going to go into hyperdrive, and they're going to have to act quickly. And you can see, in some of the reports relating to Zinedine Zidane, I don't think the U.S. Soccer Federation is wasting any time. I think they're making some initial overtures and trying to do their due diligence and cast a wide net. And I think anyone connected with the program, whether you're on the inside of it or the outside of it, is going to be very much in favor of that, because it certainly seemed like last time there wasn't a wide net cast, and that would be a welcome move, I think, for the entire program.
Jeff, obviously there's a lot of scrutiny on the Reynas, Gregg Berhalter, justifiably so. I wonder how much scrutiny is being paid towards U.S. soccer and kind of the leadership group around the men's national team. I mentioned Ernie Stewart. I thought, it's kind of crazy for him to be taking calls from parents, from people he has relationships with in a World Cup. That could obviously open some doors to some conflicts of interest. Brian McBride involved in there as well. Is there any scrutiny being paid to kind of how U.S. soccer conducts its business, or is the scrutiny here really on those involved in the scandal?
Well, I think that right now the scrutiny is on those involved in the scandal, but that focus can change. I think as the U.S. Soccer Federation gets deeper into the process, I do think a microscope is going to be held up to how they're conducting themselves and how they're going about this coaching search. And also, the extent to which those relationships that we've been talking about, whether it's between the Berhalters and the Reynas and Brian McBride and Ernie Stewart, the extent to which those relationships matter. And I think that's why, certainly before any of this came out, there was a push in some circles for a foreign coach to take over. Now, I think bringing in someone who doesn't bring with them all that baggage, who doesn't have those previous relationships that might, color the way they do things, that would almost be like a breath of fresh air. But, we'll have to wait and see, first of all, who wants the job. I think in this cycle, it's obviously going to be a very unusual cycle, because I think for at least the first year or two, there's not going to be a whole lot to look forward to if you're a prospective national team manager. So, it's obviously as the run up, to the 2026 World Cup gets closer, then I think things are going to intensify, and there are going to be aspects about the job that are going to be attractive. But right now, I mean, there are not a lot of competitive games to look forward to. I mean, I don't think the Nations League really quite cuts it from that standpoint. So again, I think there is going to be a lot of scrutiny that ultimately shifts to Ernie Stewart, especially given how the last search was conducted, and Brian McBride. And also, this is kind of new ground for, say, JT Batson to put in his 2 cents and bring his perspective to how he thinks the coaching search should be done.
Jeff, we've spoken about the impact, obviously, to Gregg Berhalter and his future, Gio Reyna and how that could impact the player, even the Federation brass. Another person of interest in this is Claudio Reyna. What, if anything, with Claudio Reyna, or impact will it have with Major League Soccer and, Austin?
I can't see it having too much of an impact. Certainly the way that Claudio Reyna and Danielle Reyna behaved is reprehensible on a lot of fronts. But, it's none of it was criminal. Let's be really clear. It's certainly embarrassing, and it's certainly it casts them in a poor light, but I don't necessarily think that that's going to result in Claudio Reyna stepping down from his position with Austin FC. Again, I think people will look at him and, maybe from a little bit different perspective than they did before. But, I think if you're Anthony Precourt and you're the owner of Austin FC, I think there are still some compelling reasons to keep Claudio Reyna on, not least of which is the way that the team has performed on the field and the team that's been constructed by him, as well as Josh Wolf.
Jeff, just for clarity's sake here, you said none of what the Reynas did was criminal. There's been a lot of use of the word blackmail around this story. Is that the right word to be using around the threats or the alleged threats that were made to U.S. soccer? Or should we be using some other word? Because I've seen blackmail used a lot.
Well, I think the word blackmail came from the way that Gregg Berhalter characterized it. It was a bid to take him down. I think that's something that the investigation is ultimately going to reveal. Certainly, with the recording that Kyle Bonagura and I did, there were threats to disclose this information, but we still don't have the entire context. And listen, there can be overt threats and there can be, veiled threats. So again, we're just going to have to see what the investigation reveals and what the coming weeks reveal. So I think the jury's still out on whether that is actually the right term to be using.
All right, there he is, Jeff Carlisle. As always, you can find his fine work on ESPN.com. Shout out to Kyle Bonagura as well, who teamed with Jeff on the reporting of this story. Thanks again, Jeff. Great to have you with us here on Futbol Americas.